I was reborn. And so was Hawk. A second ago. He glared at me and said, "If I could go back in time, I would definitely never be with you." Then, let out a low sigh. In the blink of an eye. We were back 5 years ago. The sea of people. The fireworks. And the proposal. He held flowers and knelt down on one knee. His movements stiff. I smiled and asked, "Do you still want to continue?" Hawk and I were like sworn enemies. And also childhood sweethearts. Both of us were pressured by our families to get married. That night. He was dead drunk and knocked on my door. When I opened the door, I saw that his cheeks were red, but his hair was neatly combed. He was wearing a thin white shirt, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, and he threw himself into my arms. I was watching a live stream of a handsome guy at that time. But the male streamer on the screen suddenly didn't seem so appealing anymore. I didn't delve into why Hawk came to my small apartment at 1 a. He was obviously very drunk. He cornered me and pressed his chin against my forehead. He mumbled, "Gui Gui. Marry me. My given name is Cindy. And my childhood nickname is Gui Gui. Since we were kids, Hawk always liked to pick on me." He said my name sounded too masculine, and no wonder I was so annoying. Every time he said that, I would show him my fist. After our one-sided scuffle, he said he hated me even more. When we grew up, I had a sense of shame, so I forced him to call me by my nickname Gui Gui. But he never did. So when I heard that, Gui Gui, in my ear, I looked up in surprise and saw him with hazy eyes, looking at me affectionately. The secret that I had hidden in my heart for years was stirred up, and I was completely defeated. That night, I had an intimate encounter with Hawk, and I even made him pose in many cool ways. Anyway, hading till selb sai. The next day, hading till felt my sasham. I was really beaten up by him and dragged to get the marriage certificate. We got married in a flash. My parents. And his parents. The four of them looked at each other in surprise. Their jaws dropped. And they asked me in surprise, "You're really together?" Before I could answer, Hawk responded in a deep and impatient voice. Yeah. Not only did he respond, but he also inadvertently revealed a hickey on his neck and coughed proudly. My parents. His parents. My mother looked at me with a heartbroken expression, repeatedly saying that no one knows a daughter better than her mother. And then she immediately apologized to Hawk's parents. She kept saying that it was my fault and that I should indeed take responsibility. Actually, I wanted to explain, but I found that it was indeed me who started it all. I blushed and admitted my mistake. After admitting my mistake, I secretly looked up and saw that Hawk was also looking at me seriously. After getting married, Hawk and I really started living together like partners. Under the pressure of my parents, he moved into my small apartment. He was busy with his startup business and only came back after 8 p.m. So we didn't even have meals together. I actually thought it was quite good. We got married so hastily. And I wasn't used to it. Instead, I felt much more relaxed. However, at night, when Hawk lay on the bed, I felt flustered. I opened the live streaming app in front of him, and on the screen, a handsome guy with a great body was dancing around. When Hawk looked over, his face turned dark. Cindy. I suffered again that night and finally had to beg for mercy with a hoarse voice. Days passed like this. Later, I suspected that Hawk was just using me to satisfy his needs. Just when I was about to talk to him, I found that he actually had a Weibo alternate account. The earliest message on it was from 10 years ago. Over the past 10 years, it recorded his feelings for another person. He didn't specify who the other person was. There was only one photo that vaguely revealed some information. It was a girl with long hair, standing in the sunset wearing a white dress, looking very peaceful. On the day I found out about this, I stood alone on a busy street. And as I walked around, I started crying. From that day on, Hawk and I really entered a stage of marriage where it was all about physical intimacy and not about emotions. My marital status was married, but my mindset was still that of an unmarried person. So when Hawk worked overtime and his career made great progress, I was also hanging out with my friends. I also started my own business and set up a live streaming company called the Now Virtue Studio. I signed a few male models under my company. They specialized in making dancing videos. Their bodies were top-notch. They wore a lot of clothes, and didn't even show their faces. But the atmosphere was really strong. The live streaming room became extremely popular. And we received a lot of orders for men's clothing promotion. When Hawk found out what I was doing, I was answering calls from different men every day. Once, I even had a meal and drinks with 7 handsome male models by myself. When we met by chance, Hawk was entertaining others, while my table was full of handsome men. The brothers toasted me one by one. Among them, the most handsome male model I signed, Milo, was lowering his head and calling me by my nickname, Gui Gui. Hawk immediately looked over. Late at night, Hawk grabbed my hand and angrily pinned me against the wall. Cindy, do you really have to go this far? I thought of the new content that was posted on his Weibo alternate account a few days ago. Since we are by the silver river in the blue sky, we should meet in the golden wind and jade due time. This poem expresses the feelings of separation and the inability to relieve the depression, and the longing for a day of reunion. Aphora. He was lying beside me. But when he couldn't sleep at night, he was thinking of another person. I sneered and said, yeah. We got together just because of the pressure to get married in the first place. I said, Hawk, you can't make my marriage and free and then deprive me of my hobbies. Hawk immediately turned cold. He let go of me, frowned, and said, Cindy, you make me feel that our marriage is a mistake. The pain that flashed in his eyes, I didn't see it very clearly, because I was also feeling sad. Someone who doesn't belong to me, even if I manage to get them by chance, won't bring me happiness. Hawk and I fell into a cold war. It was even more brutal, and when we had a falling out when we were kids. When we went back to our parent homes, the elders on both sides noticed it. They urged us to have a baby, and Hawk directly said meanly, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. We're not having a baby. He was indirectly mocking my genes. I retorted, who wants to have your Hawk's baby? As a result, he carried me back to his room. A room full of traces of his youth. He pressed me against the back of the door. Hawk looked at me angrily. I thought he would use his old trick, kiss me and deal with me. But instead, he just looked at me, disdainfully shook off my hand, and then took a step back. Hawk took a deep breath and looked at me quietly for half an hour. We just stood there awkwardly facing each other. Hawk said, Gui Gui, let's get a divorce. I'll set you free. When Hawk and I had a car accident, we were on our way to get the divorce certificate. We agreed to a divorce with a 1-month cooling-off period. He worked desperately, and an unmarried girl cooked porridge for him. And I was beside Milo, enjoying the happiness of a handsome guy taking care of the female boss. In the car, Hawk and I indeed quarreled again. He said, if I could go back in time, I would definitely never be with you. I wasn't to be outdone and said, what a joke. I would never marry you again either. Then, let out a low sigh. In the loud crash of the impact, Hawk and I were sent back to our college days. When I opened my eyes, it was 5 years ago. I looked at the young and sunny Hawk in front of me. He was wearing a high-end suit from the drama club and awkwardly knelt down on one knee towards me. In the auditorium, there was a sea of people. The LED screen was showing fireworks, and Hawk was holding a bouquet of roses in his hand. This was our junior year of college. That year, Hawk and I were both in the drama club and rehearsed a play for the club's 10th anniversary celebration. In this play about a reunion after separation, Hawk was supposed to propose to me. I came back to my senses and smiled, asking, do you still want to continue? Hawk stared at me blankly. And then it seemed that he finally woke up from the huge impact. He suddenly rushed towards me. I was startled, but he hugged me tightly in his arms, protecting me firmly against his chest, and kept asking, Gui Gui, are you hurt? Did you get hurt anywhere? I looked up at him in a daze and found that the corners of his eyes were scarlet, and his voice was terribly hoarse, as if his heart was breaking. I was stunned, and a sour feeling welled up in my heart. It hurt, and I felt really bad. I thought Hawk would laugh at me, mock me, say, what a stupid proposal, and then directly abandon the performance of this play. In that case, the only proposal ceremony between us, along with all the unspoken thoughts of my girlhood, would all be gone in the dust of the past. But his first reaction was actually this. The smile froze on my lips, and I called his name with a hint of grievance. Hawk. Hawk stiffened for a moment and finally slowly came back to his senses. At this time, the audience was in chaos, and there was a lot of noise. The president of the drama club, Hawk's good friend Zach, was so anxious that he cursed on the stage. "What are you standing there for? Keep acting. Damn it. Hawk. Cindy. If you guys." The swear words are too dirty. So they're automatically blocked Hawk, and I had to continue. "We were both sent back to 5 years ago. And it was a serious stage accident. The proposal ceremony was ruined by us. And the second half of the play was also dry because we forgot our lines. We were so embarrassed on the stage. And the audience's faces were filled with crazy despair. After getting off the stage, Zach blocked our way. Did you two have a fight? Can you stop fighting every day? This was a performance. And you even fought on the stage." I didn't say anything. And surprisingly, Hawk didn't say anything either. I looked up at Hawk and found that he was staring blankly out the window, not knowing what he was thinking. He must regret getting married to me. Right? After getting off the stage, I was actually also thinking that if I hadn't had that greedy thought towards him that night, would our ending have been better? I secretly looked at Hawk. In college, he was incredibly handsome with his sharp looks. When he stood up straight, even his spine exuded the vitality of youth. But now he was standing slouch-ily, looking a bit tired. Zach was anxious. "Hawk. I'm talking to you. How could you? How could you mess up the performance? Weren't you going to take this opportunity to, do something to Cindy?" Zach didn't finish his sentence. He was glared at by Hawk. Hawk unusually covered Zach's mouth. I couldn't help but laugh and said, "What were you going to do to me?" Hawk frowned and said, "It's nothing." Hawk took Zach out. After Hawk left, I suddenly heard someone asking what was going on, saying that the male-led role wasn't originally Hawk's. He had finally managed to ask Zach to help him get it. So why didn't he perform well? So the grand proposal scene 5 years ago was actually something that Hawk had fought for? I seemed to have caught on to something. When I ran out and found Hawk, I saw him standing alone under the streeteltwide. Zach had already left. I called Hawk, and he turned around to look at me. Hawk's eyes were a bit obscure, as if he was trapped in pain. "Gui. Cindy." He originally wanted to call me by my nickname, but he abruptly changed it. I summoned up the courage to hug him, but he pushed me away. I've quarreled and had disputes with Hawk. We even fought when we were kids. I once liked him, was greedy for his affection, and in the end, my heart was completely broken. He should feel the same way, right? When he was missing another girl. Did he ever think about having a good life with me? I remember that late at night, Hawk used to hold me tightly and not let go. In the heat of the moment, he would gently kiss my forehead and call my name in a hoarse voice. He would breathe against my ear and carefully call me darling. Perhaps we both once quietly opened our hearts to each other. But the ending wasn't good. I really want to ask him. We probably both died in that car accident on the way to get a divorce. Do you regret it? But I couldn't ask anything. I just quietly looked at him as he pushed me away. And I felt a bit wronged. He said, "Cindy, stop thinking about it. It's my fault." He thought that marrying me eventually lead to my death. He was telling me that our marriage was a mistake and his choice was wrong. "Don't." Hawk interrupted me. He smiled at me and said, "Darling, from today on, you're completely free." I felt that the wind was especially cold today. It was so cold that I seemed to be frozen stiff. I could only stand there quietly and watch him walk back looking dejected. I didn't cry. I have a chance to start a new life, and I can correct my wrong choices. Why should I cry? But as I walked home, the tears still couldn't help but fall. I picked up my phone and finally couldn't resist sending him a message. "Hawk. Zach said that you originally planned to take this opportunity tonight too. To do what to me?" After a while, Hawk replied, "It's okay now. Since I couldn't get an answer, I started to think for myself. I sat on the steps in front of my house and seriously thought about what had really happened on this day in my last life. In my memory, our performance was a great success. On the stage, Hawk proposed to me in a rather stiff manner. His ears were so red from nervousness. But he still pretended to be natural and said, "Marry me." I was so nervous that I was shaking and said, "Okay." Then we hugged each other tightly on the stage. Hawk looked at me with red eyes and deep affection. That was the first time I clearly felt his emotions. But in such a false scene, Ms. P. I couldn't even tell if it was sincere or just an act. When the curtain call came, Hawk said to me, "Wait for me after the show ends." But that night, I didn't wait for him at all. I only received a call from an unknown number. Hawk's blurred voice came from the phone. And he said, "Cindy, don't wait for me. I'm going to break my promise tonight." When I went back to school the next day, I learned that Hawk had become famous overnight the night before. He was already a big shot in school, and playing the male lead in a romantic drama immediately attracted a lot of junior female students. Many junior female students blocked him backstage and confessed their love to him. There were so many people who liked him that even Zach's sister came. Later, I heard that night, he, Zach's sister, and Zach had stayed together and played all night. They belonged to the same world, and I was the only one left in the cold wind. It was from that day on that I started to drift apart from Hawk. Our relationship, which wasn't very good to begin with, became even colder. Until the night we made a mistake. He was dead drunk. His eyes were red. And he was wearing a thin shirt when he knocked on the door of my apartment. So, what exactly happened on this day of the performance in my last life? What else did I miss? I have an advantage. If I can't figure something out, I just stop thinking about it. I decided to ask directly. Hawk and I are in the same department. Although we have different majors, we have 2 large classes together every week. Coincidentally, the next day was one of those large classes. When I arrived at the large classroom, I sat in the exclusive seat according to my memory. Hawk and I go to the same university. And Hawk's father and stepmother asked him to take care of me, to perfunctorily deal with his parents. He reached an agreement with me that as long as we had large classes, we would sit together. Our seats were in the corner of the classroom, next to the window. Every time the jacker and the flowers outside the window bloomed, this seat was incredibly beautiful. Hawk greeted the students from the 2 classes, and this seat was reserved for him. And I was lucky enough to be able to sit here every time because of him. Today, after I sat down, I saw Hawk enter the classroom. He paused for a moment, turned to the next group, and sat next to Zach. Zach was excited. "Hawk, why did you come to my side today? By the way, last night you reminded me to go to the men's changing room to find Grace immediately. I went and indeed found her hiding there. Later, I took Grace to the hospital to see." Zach's voice suddenly became quieter, and I couldn't hear it anymore. I looked at Hawk in frustration. As he listened to Zach, he also looked over at me. My nose became sour again, so I simply turned my head and looked out the window. I understood what he meant. Was he really determined to draw a clear line with me? My stubbornness flared up, and I also stood up and left my seat. There is a very handsome guy in our class. If Hawk is like a clear breeze and a bright moon, then Wild is like a wild and unrestrained horse. Most importantly, he is also the elder brother of Milo, the most handsome male model in the studio I signed with before. It's a pity that I entered the live streaming business late. At that time, Wild had already signed a contract with a big company and had become the #1 male model in the industry. Later, to support my entrepreneurship, he introduced Milo to me. Wild is much more handsome than Milo. So, right in front of Hawk's eyes, I ran to find Wild. I smiled and called out, "Wild! Wild!" I stayed with Wild throughout the whole class, to build a good relationship in advance. I also made an appointment with Wild to go riding a motorcycle on the weekend. When the class ended, Hawk looked back at me. I was chatting casually with Wild, and I didn't know how much he heard. He didn't show any reaction, and I wasn't annoyed either. In the following days, my entrepreneurial spirit flared up, and I successively found several good-looking boys in the same city. When Hawk came home, he happened to run into me interviewing new male models in a nearby coffee shop. The boys who came to talk about cooperation were full of youthful vitality. There were sunny types, the little wolf dog types, and there was also a boy with silver white hair, sharp facial features, wearing a vest, and with well-defined abdominal muscles. One of the boys, I don't know where he learned this bad habit, as he talked, he got closer to me and called me sister. He wanted to take my arm, but before he could touch me, Hawk almost broke his arm. I looked up at Hawk, who suddenly appeared. His face was extremely dark. Hawk directly pulled me out of the coffee shop. Cindy, what on earth do you want to do? He cornered me and lowered his head to ask me, do you know how old you are now? Are you really going to be so promiscuous? I immediately felt wronged. I asked him, what do you mean by being so promiscuous? The flames in Hawk's eyes gradually died down, leaving a dark and bottomless hole. Hawk said in a hoarse voice, looking very painful, you should focus on your studies at this time. Regarding love and relationships, can you not be in such a hurry? As he spoke, his tone even became a bit humble. My heart suddenly felt stuffy. Hawk has always been rational and organized in front of me. Since I was a child, my parents have always told me to learn from him. And they even wished that we could be together and our two families could become in-laws. The words of retort got stuck in my throat, and I endured the soreness and said, I see. What do you see? I will study hard. Then there was a long silence. Hawk persuaded me like an elder brother, darling, you should spend more time with girls. Some boys at this age are very promiscuous, not steady enough, and unreliable. Life is very long. You should wait a little longer until. Are you showing concern for me? Hawk suddenly fell silent. I was inexplicably irritated and replied to him. Why do you think you can control me? In what capacity? With what right? He was the one who said we should get married, and he was also the one who said we should get a divorce. Even after being reborn, it was him who said, from today on, you're completely free. He distanced himself from me and started his own new life. Since he has already decided to make a new choice, why does he still want to control me? Cindy. He was suppressing his emotions. I said, I study for the rise of China and strive for handsome men with broad shoulders and narrow waists. I'm just like this. And I might not be able to change it. Hawk finally couldn't stand it anymore. He grabbed me tightly, and his rapid breaths sprayed on my face. He seemed to be really sad. Darling, will I never be able to wait for you to settle down? I was stunned. I also felt turned in my heart. I don't know where I got the courage. But I said to him forcefully, but I've never been promiscuous in my life. It seemed that Hawk and I had fallen out again. This was reflected in the fact that we didn't even greet each other when we passed by. But few times when I saw him, he was chatting with several boys in the corridor. When he saw me, he moved a bit. But in the end, his gaze that landed on me still shifted elsewhere. Someone asked him, Hawk, did you have a quarrel with Darling? Hawk lowered his eyes and remained silent. It took a long time for him to say, no. I was so angry that I quickened my pace and walked forward. Fine. No. When there is a quarrel, there is a chance to make up. But not having a quarrel means that we are gradually drifting apart. Although this life is different from the last one, the ending is still the same. Hawk and I still drifted apart in this year. In the first semester of my senior year, a homicide occurred at the intersection of my home. A female high school student who was on her way home from school was dragged into an alley. 13 knives were stabbed into her main artery. And each knife was fatal. Recently, my parents said, Darling, you'd better stay on campus more often and go home less these days. They didn't know that this would happen. They just heard that there were hooligans in the vicinity. I said, it's okay. I remember the time and location of the incident. In fact, it was some distance away from my home. As long as I take a detour when I go home, it will be fine. Moreover, going home more often can allow me to accompany my parents. Maybe I can even save that girl. It's a human life after all. After hearing what I said, My parents didn't worry about it anymore. But when I actually did it, I found that someone had been following me for 3 or 4 consecutive days when I went home. At first, I thought it was the criminal. I thought of all kinds of ways and made all kinds of preparations. But when I lured the person into the alley and took out the stun gun, I found that it was actually Hawk. Hawk, who hadn't talked to me for a long time and had been avoiding me intentionally or unintentionally. When Hawk saw me holding the stun gun, he was also taken aback. The tension on his face relaxed a bit. But he also looked a bit at a loss. I asked, "Why are you following me?" "I was just passing by." I had already observed, passing by from school to my home. This time, Hawk didn't say anything. His home is close to mine, but there are still several alleys between them. This is a place he would never pass by. Hawk remained silent, looking as if he would never admit it. Since he didn't say anything, I stopped asking and walked forward, feeling annoyed and shaking him off. Hawk kept following me until he saw me safely into my home. Before entering the house, I was going to turn around and greet him, but I only saw his back as he left. He didn't even give me a chance to talk. Does he hate me? Or is he afraid of something? At night, I lay in bed unable to fall asleep. I was thinking about the differences between this life and my previous life. In my previous life, starting from the junior year stage play, he had a lot of contact with Zach and Zach's younger sister. I heard that he was always staying with Zach's younger sister. And what was I doing at that time? I had good popularity in the class, especially with Wild and the others. Wild was different from the others. Sometimes others would call me Cindy or Gui Gui, but only he liked to call me Cindy. Whether in public or private. As soon as he saw me, he would come over to my side and then call me Cindy. The way he called me was different from others. He always liked to roll the ending sound of the word, adding a bit of charm to it. From the second semester of junior year until graduation in senior year, Hawk stayed with Zach and Zach's younger sister, while I hung out with Wild's brothers, and my good sisters in the dormitory. We each lived our own lives well and left behind beautiful memories of our youth. Now, for some reason, this time Hawk has become much more silent. His relationship with Zach is still good, but his contact with Zach's younger sister has decreased. I haven't heard any news about Hawk and Zach's younger sister for a long time. In fact, there has been no connection between them since the stage play in this life. What on earth happened during this period? After getting up early, I ate breakfast absentedly. Before going out, my mother asked me, "Gui Gui, are you and Hawk okay?" I could see that my mother was concerned about Hawk. When I was very young and naive, she always liked to say, "I wish Hawk were my son." Later, she said, "You should date Hawk. He would make a good son-in-law too." And later on, she only said, "Just try to quarrel less. You too. Amitabha. May you live a long life." Now, looking at the way we're half alive and not talking, I guess she's been holding it in for a long time. I said, "It's okay. After all, the relationship between the two of us isn't something that I can decide on my own. We don't even quarrel in this life. So it should be considered okay. Right?" My mother hesitated and asked, "But Hawk's birthday is coming up soon. Why do I see that you haven't prepared anything for him this year?" Me. My mother. "Weren't you always the most enthusiastic in previous years?" I always prepared Hawk's gift early. But because of those unspoken girlish feelings, shyness, low self-esteem, and the sensitivity of being afraid that Hawk would see through me and laugh at me, I always threw the gift to him at the last moment as if perfunctorily. Like a child who never grew up, I would say to him without any regard for seniority, "My brother cousin. Various types of brothers doesn't need it, so I'm giving it to you. Happy birthday. Don't be too polite." Until this year, I was probably afraid that seeing the related things would bring back painful memories. So I didn't dare to remember his birthday too deliberately. I was in so much pain that I subconsciously avoided it. I said inferently, "Oh." My mother can be translated as frustrated at someone's failure to live up to expectation and said, "You child." On Hawk's birthday, we both went home separately. My mother didn't mention celebrating Hawk's birthday again. And Hawk's mother didn't invite me over either. It was as if we had a tacit understanding. Until 9 o'clock in the evening. I finally couldn't hold back and said to my mother, "Mom, I'll cook a bowl of birthday noodles. Can you help me deliver it to him?" My mother said, "Oh? Me? Don't tell him that I cooked it. I don't want him to know." I told myself that this was Hawk's first birthday since we came back. In the past, we were naive and always hurt each other. I didn't dare to tell him what I had done for him before. And now, I don't have the position to do too many things for him. Moreover, recently he has always been silently protecting me on my way home. Although he hid it more carefully, I still found out. At this time, I still didn't understand that when a person wants to do something, they will always find many reasons for themselves. And these were just the reasons I found for myself. When my mother came back, I stood at the door expectantly, wanting to hear her talk about what happened over there. But my mother didn't say anything. She changed her shoes, changed into her pajamas, and just wandered around the house. Half an hour later, my mother deliberately laughed at me and said, "What are you following me for?" I finally couldn't help but ask, "Did he eat it?" She knew I was asking about the birthday noodles. She said, "Yes. He did. I don't understand you two. Nowadays, every child seems to be a bit strange." One made the noodles but didn't want to say it, and the other looked at them for more than 10 minutes and didn't want to eat. I didn't dare to think too deeply about it. Nor did I dare to ask any more questions. I didn't know what Hawk was thinking during those more than 10 minutes when he was looking at the noodles. Recently, the number of times I've met Hawk has gradually increased. Although we still rarely talk. At least we're like normal ordinary friends now. We greet each other when we meet. The friendship between gentlemen is as plain as water. I always thought that this was how he felt in his heart. Until the day when the murder case at the entrance of the alley in my memory arrived. That day, I avoided it early. But after thinking about it, I decided to save that girl. So I determined the alley where the incident would occur based on my memory, and even called the police in advance. But in the end, at that time and that place, the murderer who was taking revenge on society didn't show up. The girl who should have been murdered had safely passed through the alley. I finally let out a sigh of relief. But what I didn't know was that this was like the butterfly flapping its wings in the butterfly effect, which would eventually bring a hurricane to me. A month later, after I completely let down my guard, one day on my way home, I was cornered into an alley. I met that murderer with a ferocious face and a sinister smile. He knew martial arts and directly forced me into a dead end, knocking away my stun gun. Just when I closed my eyes in despair, a fist came towards him. In the chaos, I saw Hawk, who was out of breath, with red eyes and filled with fear. His voice was hoarse, and he shouted hysterically, "Gui gui! Run! Run!" He only had time to say these 2 sentences before he rolled on the ground with that gangster. Punches landed on the flesh, and I didn't know whose cries of pain they were. Maybe it was the gangster. Or maybe it was Hawk. I always felt that the gangster took more beatings. Because Hawk was doing his best to protect me. Because of the previous police report. The police listened to my suggestion and strength and their surveillance of this area. They arrived quickly this time. When the police arrived, both the gangster and Hawk were lying in the alley. The gangster was indeed in a worse state. I rushed up crying and searched for Hawk in the dark. "Wake up! Wake up!" Hawk's vision was blurred from the beating. When he opened his eyes and saw me, and saw that I was safe and sound in front of him, he smiled. I stopped crying and laughed. "You're still smiling?" As we were laughing, he passed out from the pain, and I burst into tears. Hawk was taken to the hospital. While he was in a coma, he kept shouting, "Gui gui! Gui gui!" in his dream. He was also hoarse and his voice was too low to be clearly heard. When I leaned in, I was surprised to hear him say, "I'm sorry. Gui gui." I held his hand tightly. But it didn't have much effect. The doctor treated his wounds. A passing nurse beside us couldn't help but say, "It's so nice to be young nowadays. The way we are now is like a young couple in love." The extremely handsome and manly boy went all out to protect the person he liked. But that's not the truth. Only we know it ourselves. We once loved each other without realizing it. We were scarred in our marriage. We chose to get a divorce and start a new life. But on this night after we separated, he risked everything for me and protected me in his own way. We're not a young couple in love. We're just travelers who have strayed into the depths of time. Hawk. The thin blue medical curtain separated me and Hawk into one world. This was the closest I had been to him since we came back. Holding hands with each other, I pressed against his chest, listening to his heartbeat and crying silently. A corner of the sky was lifted, and sunlight shone through. When the dawn fell, Hawk finally slowly woke up, and he let out a faint groan of pain. I was awake and by this slight sound. I immediately looked up and opened my eyes to look at him. As a result, I saw him looking at me with a complex expression, as if a storm was brewing in his eyes. Cindy. I didn't want to care about why he deliberately called me by my full name instead of my nickname. I immediately got up with red eyes, lowered my head, and kissed the corner of his lips. Hawk was stunned. And then his eyes became even more difficult and complex. Finally, having fulfilled my, he couldn't control his surging emotions and barely propped himself up to hug me. His big hand circled around my waist and pulled me towards him, not caring if he pressed on his wound. At this moment, the kiss made my heart pound and my heart rate accelerate. Tears streamed down my face, and Hawk also tasted the bitterness. Just when this kiss was gradually changing, the blue curtain was suddenly lifted. My parents, his parents, the 4 elders were standing outside the curtain, holding fruits, thermal boxes, and breakfast. And just a step away, Hawk and I were hugging each other, our faces red from the kiss. Me, Hawk, my parents and his parents were stunned, and they almost dropped the things in their hands. Even the doctor in charge of the bed looked over because of the commotion. I felt so embarrassed. Hawk was hospitalized for 2 days. After it was confirmed that he only had minor injuries, he was discharged from the hospital and went home to recuperate. But instead of staying at home properly, he came to my house with his bandaged hand. My parents warmly entertained him with fruits. After a while, uncle and aunt, who used the excuse of visiting, also came over upon hearing the news. The expressions in their eyes were not those of being worried about the injured child at all. They were clearly here to watch the show. Uncle. Aunt. Hawk said gently. My parents, hey, there was a smile at the corner of Hawk's eyes. But when he saw me sitting there nervously, his eyes darkened again. It was as if he had suddenly returned to reality. My father deliberately put on a serious face and asked, "When did you two start?" I was afraid that my parents would cause trouble for him, so I deliberately played dumb. My parents didn't beat around the bush either. When did you start dating? Hawk. We didn't date. Me, today. Our 2 voices almost overlapped at the same time. Hawk suddenly looked at me, and there was a storm in his eyes again. I had gradually made up my mind and said, "We started dating today. That's why I asked him to come over." My parents? Who made the first move that day in the hospital? My face turned red, and I said softly, "It was me." My parents were speechless. Goodness. It was like the familiar trial by 4 elders. I felt as if I had returned to my previous life. That day, Hawk pretended to casually pull down his collar and proudly showed the hickey on his neck that was full of suggestive implications. I couldn't help but look at him. And his reaction wasn't much more natural than the last time. At first, when he heard me admit it, there was a light in his eyes. But soon it dimmed. I think it's necessary to have a talk with him. I smiled at our 4 parents. And right in front of them, I directly took his hand and pulled him into the room. This familiar action left our parents stunned. In the room, I questioned Hawk. I asked him why he seemed so preoccupied, whether he liked me, and why he hadn't told me. He said, "I've always liked you. But I was too afraid to say it. Because how could anyone associate to people who quarreled every day with the feeling of liking each other?" He said that at the very beginning, he had asked my roommate and best friend about me. And the reply he got was, I didn't like him. He knew I didn't like him. And he was even more afraid to express his feelings. I said, "When did you ask?" He replied, "In the 2nd semester of our freshman year." I covered my face and said, That was really too early. I'm straightforward and didn't understand matters of the heart until rather late. During our freshman year, all I could think about was how to win an argument with him. At that time, I disliked him so much that even when there were more and more people confessing their love for him on the campus wall, I would find ways to suppress it. Back then, I didn't know what this sense of being bothered and this special concern meant, until our junior year. The moment we were performing on the stage, he was wearing a suit. Although he was clearly nervous, he pretended to be mature and knelt down on one knee in front of me, saying, "Marry me." At that moment, he stood against the light, and I finally heard the sound of my own heartbeat. I said that at my late blooming age, if he had told me his feelings earlier, perhaps I could have understood earlier and learned how to like someone. Hawk laughed in a deep voice. I was afraid that if I said it, we wouldn't even be able to be friends anymore. And by then, the relationship between our parents would also be affected by his immature actions. He said that if the truth wasn't revealed, we could still maintain the status quo. He could still stay by my side, watch me from a distance. And it was also nice for the two of us to play and bicker. I asked him that if that was the case, why did he have the courage later to knock on my door when he was drunk late at night? Hawk said that he had always had the courage. But during that much longer period of time, what growth had taught him first was restraint. At that time, we were no longer young. He accidentally heard my parents arranging a blind date for me and wanting to introduce a boy to me. He was really worried. So he investigated the boy on my behalf first. And it turned out to be a bad deal. That's why he took the plunge and thought that it would be better if he were the one to give me happiness. It's just that we both underestimated the difficulty of managing a marriage. When do people live and get along together? How could there be no friction and conflicts? He never thought of giving up until he saw how painful I was and heard me say that I had lost my freedom. He finally realized that he had made a mistake. So he proposed a divorce. And that's how the subsequent events unfolded. However, he discovered that the chain reaction of the divorce was our death and a car accident. And he was even more terrified. Hawk asked me in a hoarse voice. You tell me, how could someone who loves another person bear to let her be hurt even a little bit? Moreover, these injuries were caused by me. I simply can't forgive myself. I can only have nightmares every night and reflect on myself every night. Hawk and I thus reaffirmed our relationship. This time, we were truly together with our hearts wide open and without any grudges. Hawk asked me why. And I said, although we were hurt in our previous marriage, if it's you, I still can't bear to part with you. And I still want to be as brave as a moth flying into the fire one more time. 3 months after we confirmed our relationship, one night at around 1 o'clock in the morning, Zach's sister suddenly called Hawk. Coincidentally, I saw the caller ID. Hawk hesitated and didn't answer. But he also didn't hang up. I looked at him. And Hawk suddenly made up his mind to answer the call. Then he directly took me to the hospital. That's when I learned that Zach's sister had actually been sent to a hospital for treating mental illnesses by Zach. I suddenly remembered that not long after I was reborn, when Hawk was sitting with Zach, Zach had said that sentence, by the way, last night you reminded me to quickly take Grace to the hospital to see. So was it Hawk who reminded Zach to take his sister to get treatment for her mental illness? In the hospital, I saw Grace in a frenzy. Her eyes were red like a wild beast's. She laughed and cried from time to time. And then she started hitting the wall again and again. After hitting the wall enough, she picked up a stool and threw it at the hospital bed, shouting loudly, I want Hawk. Let Hawk come and stay with me. Hawk looked solemn but didn't want to pay any attention to her at all. In the end, it was Zach who came out as a peacemaker, saying that Grace had been on a hunger strike because she couldn't see Hawk, and the doctor had been giving her nutritional injections to sustain her life for the past week. Tonight, he had no choice but to give her his phone and allow her to contact Hawk. After fulfilling her wish of seeing Hawk, she was finally happy. But when she saw me beside Hawk, she went crazy again. Zach looked at me and Hawk together with a complicated expression. I suddenly thought of the previous life. After Hawk, Grace hadn't fulfilled Weibo. And Zach didn't come home that night during our junior year. I heard some ambiguous rumors about Hawk and Grace. which were all told to me by Zach. At that time, I only knew that he was Hawk's best friend. And Grace was his sister. He wouldn't do anything to ruin his sister's reputation. But now I understand it all. This was a brother who was struggling in pain for his sister's happiness. It's not surprising that he would do anything to save his sister, who suffered from bipolar disorder. When we walked out of the hospital, Hawk told me that on the night of the stage play in the previous life, he became famous overnight. So when he was about to go to find me, he was stopped by several girls who wanted to give him gifts. Among them, Grace was the one who pestered him the most. Because her brother was the president of the drama club, she had even stealthily hidden in the men's changing room in advance without caring about others. That night, she blocked him and wouldn't let him out, and she confessed her love to him frantically. She had been a pampered girl since childhood and had an arrogant personality. In the Zhu family, over for generations, more than a dozen boys had been born, and she was the only girl. She was truly treated like a precious gem, and she had to get whatever she wanted. So after her confession was rejected, she threw a tantrum like a spoiled young lady and directly started taking off her clothes in front of Hawk. While crying, she said, "I want to see if you dare not take responsibility for me after you've seen me naked." As a result, when Zach came in and saw this scene, he was so angry that he fought with Hawk. They closed the door and fought that night. And no one knew about it. It was also that night that Grace was stimulated by the absurd scene she had caused herself and had her first mental breakdown. One person who had lost control of her emotions and to people who were injured in the fight went to the hospital that very night. Hawk smiled and said, "At that time, in the middle of the fight, I even asked Zach to pause for a moment so that I could call you first." So the phone call in which he told me that he would break his promise that night was made in such a situation. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I heard this. As I was laughing, I felt sorry for him. I also felt sorry for myself, who had waited for him so desperately in the middle of the night that year. Hawk told me, "That night, I was originally going to confess my love to you, but it was completely ruined by Zach and his sister." I asked, "Then why didn't you confess later?" Hawk fell silent. He looked at me and said, "Grace died." After Grace's confession was rejected, her mental illness became more and more severe. She threatened to commit suicide to force him to come and see her and stay with her every now and then. If he didn't want to come, she would cut her wrists. At that time, with human lives at stake, the doctor said that he was a major factor in what triggered Grace's illness. Her rejection by him made the patient unable to accept it. When dealing with such a patient, one had to proceed step by step and not overstimulate her emotions. At that time, how could he confess his love when he had to deal with this matter? Moreover, the reason he wanted to confess his love to me was just that he had finally mustered up the courage to fight for a chance for himself. It didn't matter if the chance could wait. But later, he still couldn't help his friends save his sister. Grace used suicide as a threat to others too often. Sooner or later, she would make a mistake, and in the end, she really killed herself. Perhaps death was a relief for Grace, but for those who were still alive, it became a burden. He just rejected her, but in the end, he was burdened with a human life. The invisible shackles pressed down on him so hard that he couldn't breathe. In short, he had a very difficult time during that period. So after being reborn, he avoided Grace and even reminded Zach to go to the changing room in advance. Zach discovered Grace's irritable and paranoid symptoms that night. She was shouting that she wanted to confess her love to Hawk and told Zach not to ruin her good deed. Looking at his unfamiliar sister, Zach thought of some crazy things Grace had done in high school. Those details that Zach had overlooked were connected together, making Zach terrified. It was at such a moment, when Zach came to him for help, that Hawk cleverly proposed the suggestion that Zach take her to see a doctor and have a comprehensive examination. Early detection and early treatment. This time, this matter was simply something for the Zhu family and had nothing to do with him. Even tonight, he didn't come here for Grace and Zach. Hawk stood under the street lamp and smiled at me. There are some things that my wife should know earlier. Only he himself knew how many detours he had taken, and how many difficulties he had gone through in the previous life before he was brave enough to come to my side. I asked him, Were you nervous when you knocked on my door that night? Hawk's Adam's apple rolled. He lowered his head and held my hand. The moment we entered the door, he pressed me against the wall. He said in a low voice, "I was nervous. So I got myself drunk first." He placed my hand on his chest and asked me, "Do you like it?" 3 years later, Grace was cured and discharged from the hospital. This was also the third year after our graduation from university. The second year when Hawk, Zach, and a group of their bed friends in the dormitory decided to start a business. And the second year since the establishment of my men's virtue studio. This year, both Hawk's and my careers were booming. He benefited from his previous life's entrepreneurial experience and avoided many detours. And I caught up with the benefits of the era and successfully established a leading company in the live streaming industry. We had both achieved our respective accomplishments after graduating from university. My parents hinted at me, "Darling, when are you two going to get married?" I replied to them without Hawk's knowledge. "Soon," let out a low sigh. "Soon. This year." I wanted to take the initiative and take a few more steps towards Hawk. The usual proposal ceremony was really not surprising. So I came up with an idea and organized a hiking spring outing. When the cherry blossoms were in full bloom in March, we went camping. And all our good friends went. This time, the male models I had signed with my studio in advance, led by Milo, were the most enthusiastic about setting up the tents. More than a dozen male models helped me prepare the proposal venue. As a result, when Hawk arrived, he saw me sitting under the tree and chatting and laughing with a group of handsome guys. Each of them was handsome in their own unique way, and I seemed to be enjoying the company of many good-looking men. Milo called me Gui. Originally, having fulfilled my obsession, he wanted to call me Sister Gui, but before he could say the word sister, he was so scared by Hawk's stays that he swallowed it back. Looking at Hawk's expression, I knew it was time. Everyone turned on the projector. There was a screen in front of each tent, and each screen projected a character. When put together, it read, "Hawk, will you marry me?" Hawk looked at these words, walked directly into the crowd, hugged me, and called me in a low voice, Gui. This voice seemed to pass through the wind from that distant year and blow to the present. After my proposal was successful, everyone insisted that we hold a thank you banquet. I happily arranged it. Besides the friends who participated in the proposal, Wild and Zach also came. When Wild came, he first called me Cindy. And finally, with a complex expression, he said in a slightly arrogant tone, "Cindy." And Zach. So when I heard that, Gui, in my ear, I looked up in surprise and saw him with hazy eyes, looking at me affectionately. Seriously. He was grateful to Hawk for discovering something was wrong with his sister and told everyone. Hawk is amazing. My sister has only come to my dormitory a dozen times from the time I started college until now. Hawk just took a few casual glances at her and actually noticed something was wrong. Hawk. You're like Huatuo reborn. Hawk. I'm giving you a wedding gift today. I brought you the photo you love the most. Zach deliberately made a goofy dubbing sound. While shouting ding ding, ding, he tore open the wrapping paper, revealing a photo frame that was half a person's height. It was a photo I was very familiar with. A girl with long hair stood in the sunset wearing a white dress. And the years were peaceful. The difference was that this girl was blurred this time, with a layer of mist-like mosaic on her. In the enlarged photo, the details were particularly clear. In the processed photo, the lively girl in the shadow of the lower right corner was especially noticeable. I looked back and smiled in the sunlight, squinting one eye and making a particularly cute face. This was a candid shot, and I didn't even know it existed. This was a secret that I had been puzzled about for a long time and no longer cared about, and it was unexpectedly revealed at this moment. Everyone was laughing at my funny expression. But all I could think was, so this was his most hidden thought in those 10 years. From the very beginning, the person he liked the most was only me. For 10 years. His heart never strayed. And he remained consistent. The end of the full text.